Good evening, friends. I, on behalf of Beyond Law CLC, welcome you all to yet another virtual sessions being held by Beyond Law CLC. Amongst us, we have Professor Dr. B.T. Kaul, who is a former chairman of the Delhi Judicial Academy and has also taught in the University of Delhi, India. He is an alumnus of Faculty of Law, Delhi University and London School of Economics and Political Science. Those who have been following him would see that he has vast knowledge on different perspectives of law. Today we thought that on the day of Janmashtami, let's have insights from a person whose knowledge over the labor rights and criminal law is well known. These are the two facets for which he's being widely acknowledged, not only in India, but across the globe. His webinars on the different platforms have always been widely accepted. Therefore, we requested Mr. Professor Bhushan Tilak Kaul, who is a well-recognized name as a practicing lawyer also in Supreme Court of India and Delhi. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invite. And on a day when everyone is in the festive mood of Janmashtami, as you rightly said, but we thought that to have the fruit, as in Gita, they said that you should do karam kare chal or phal ki ichha na kar. So to have the fruits on a Labor Day, it's as a connotation that we should all do labor and the fruits will automatically come. So labor of knowledge is a fact which we all recognize that once you start doing the labor, the fruits automatically come. And once we have the knowledge and insights being coming from a person of your stature, the fruits of the labor would definitely be sweet, and that too on a Janmashtami. Happy Janmashtami to all those who are logged in with us. And thank you, sir, for accepting our invite, and that too on a Janmashtami day. Yes, sir.
Should I start? Yeah, good. Should I say good evening to you all and wonderful.
I think it's not audible. I can ask on the other platform.
Yeah.
Just whether he's audible.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
So I think you will have to check it at your place. At least it's not audible to me. Naveen, उधर पूछना सुनाई दे रहा है? Sir, people are saying it's audible. I will check it at my place.
Yeah. Okay. Good evening to everybody, and wonderful greetings on this Janmashtami. I'm sure it was a festival day, therefore many of you must be in a holiday mood, though every day is a holiday these days, except on the virtual platform. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, perfect. So slightly you can keep the camera higher because it's starting to change.
Is that okay?
Yes, sir, it's fine.
It's fine?
Yes, sir.
Well, I thought, this is a subject which is very important subject, but not much in demand these days. Because these days, I think labor rights are not respected the way they should be respected. But I'm sure this is only a transitory phase. After some time, we'll have again labor rights issues getting in the focal point of everybody's attention. But be that as it may, I think it's very important for me to make it very clear that labor is a very vast subject. I cannot deal with the whole of the subject, but I have decided to confine it to industrial relations mainly. And industrial relations at the central level are dealt with by the Trade Unions Act, Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act, and the Industrial Disputes Act 1947. So far as other provisions are concerned, other statutes are concerned, we may in the passing have reference to them. But mainly my thrust will be to deal with industrial relations aspect of it, because we have, as you all must be aware, 4 codes in the offing, which is going to, these 4 codes are going to consolidate all labor laws at the central level. One is called Industrial Relations Code. Second is what we call as Wage Code, which has already been passed by the houses in Parliament, and it's just waiting for the notification to be issued as and when it will come into operation. But my inside knowledge is that government is still having new thoughts on it, and maybe that they may in the light of the COVID-19 situation, have a relook at all the codes and the social security code. And fourth is what is we call as welfare and safety code, that is fourth aspect of it. But let me confine to, since I'm going to deal with the labor rights, the evolution of labor rights, I must take you back to what we call as a story from laissez-faire era to the welfare state. All of you know that employer-employee relationship essentially is determined by the contract of employment. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
See, every employer-employee relationship, as we used to call it earlier, was master and servant relationship. And that is where we make a distinction between contract of service and contract for service. And master-servant relationship is always a contract of service. And, you know, during laissez-faire era, state was merely a spectator. It would not interfere. It would leave the parties to decide for themselves what is good and bad for them. The state was primarily concerned with only 3 important functions that it thought it had. One was to protect the boundaries, maintain the law and order, and to collect the revenues. But if you look at in the context of demand and supply theory, and the most of the labor force used to be unskilled labor force. So therefore, it is the employer's dictation as to what should be the wages payable to the employee. And when he would individually bargain it, he would be at a very, very inferior position. And it is always the employer who would dictate the terms and conditions to the employee. Now, this led to the exploitation of the labor, work even for starvation wages. And all of you are aware about Newton's laws of motion. To every action, there is equal and opposite reaction. And when the workers found that individually they were not able to improve their service conditions, they decided to combine. And when they decided to combine, the employers decided to use all weapons in their legal armory to ensure that these people are not allowed to combine. And if you look at the history of the law development in the industrialized world, which was where the Industrial Revolution was taking place, and you will find that the employers used mainly the conspiracy doctrine and the restraint of trade doctrine against the workers from combining. So therefore, workers had to fight their way out first to ensure to themselves right to form association, and on forming the association, they collective bargaining, and for achieving the object of having collective bargaining as the mechanism for, they also had to get immunity against what were commonly known as conspiracy doctrines and restraint of trade doctrines. It's a very, very difficult and hard story if you look at. You just have to go through the pages of the first National Labour Commission, which was set up by the Government of India in 1969. And you will come to know that the labor rights, to the extent that they got some right to form association and immunity, was basically a 20th century development. So therefore, the rights of the labor, if we say that labor rights have evolved, they have not evolved long back. They have evolved, and these are just not even a century old rights that we talk about. So therefore, you must understand how these rights came to be evolved. If you look at just today, we talk about United States of America. And if you see the history of United States of America up to 1932, they did not have right to form association in that sense of the term as we understand it. There used to be what we called as yellow dog contracts. Now, yellow dog contracts were lawful contracts, and under those contracts, an employer could, in the terms of employment, put a stipulation that if you become member of a union, the employer will have unqualified right to terminate your service. Contracts. This I am talking about, we are talking about United States of America. And it was only in 1935 when there was a legislation called Norris-LaGuardia Act, which made these yellow dog contracts unlawful. And it was for the first time a legislation of the type, what we call as National Labor Relations Act of 1935, was passed, which gave workers the right to form association in true sense of the term and to collectively bargain. And collective bargaining became one of the statutory obligations between employers and workers' union. So therefore, you just look back, it is not even 1 century old right that has accrued to the working class in United States. If you look at United Kingdom, which was supposed to be the mother of the Industrial Revolution, there were acts called 1799 and 1800 Act, which are called Combinations Act, which prohibited workers from combining. It was only in 1981 that workers could truly form trade unions. It was therefore the 1980s Trade Union Act that gave right to the workers to form lawful trade union, lawful combinations. But essentially, certain cases came before the courts, and workers, in spite of this legislation, had to pay compensation for going on strikes, and therefore a new legislation had to be passed, Trade Disputes Act of 1906. So therefore, Trade Disputes Act of 1906 was the real legislation which assured in the United Kingdom true right of the workers to combine, workers' right to withhold supply of labor for the purposes of entering into collective bargaining agreements with the employers. In India, India was essentially an agriculture economy, but with the Industrial Revolution taking place in the West, in many centers, industries started coming up, and there was migration of the labor from villages to the city, and a new culture was developed, and people had therefore to depend only upon their wages. And workers here also tried to combine themselves, but then there was a case, and which is a very famous case, called Buckingham and Karnataka Mills case. In Buckingham and Karnataka Mills case, there was a Madras Labor Union. Madras Labor Union formed itself, and they gave a call for a strike, and the Buckingham and Karnataka Mills company went to the Madras High Court, running for two reliefs: one, that workers should be restrained from combining, and second, that they had suffered losses and therefore they should be compensated. The Madras High Court passed the order restraining the workers from entering into any kind of agreement which would result in coercive action against the employer, and it would have awarded compensation in favor of the company, but for the fact the matter was settled outside the court. This was 1920. I am only talking about just 100 years old story. And luckily for Indian workers, by this time, the League of Nations for the first time set up what we call as ILO, International Labour Organization, which was set up in 1919. And India was one of the founder members of the ILO. Now, the influence of the ILO and also the fact that Indian workers movement, trade union movement, and the independence movement was moving hand in hand. People who were leading the workers at the in the movement for right to form associations were also the freedom fighters for getting India freedom from the foreign yoke. And therefore, you can see both these movements running simultaneously. And at the front of this movement was Gandhiji. And two of his incidents, which I just want to cite, and those are very important aspects that I want to talk about. Gandhiji was responsible for getting certain matters mediated in Ahmedabad textile mills in 1920. Around that time, because it was the time when the World War I had come to an end, and there was a lot of accumulation of the stocks in the textile industry, and workers were demanding payment of bonus which they had been getting earlier, and the management was trying to deny them this right because they said now that the war has come to an end and therefore the business had suffered, textile industry was suffering. So finally some bonus was given to the workers, and also around this time the demand for payment of dearness allowance was also raised. I'll come to that aspect later on. But these factors were responsible to a greater extent for passing up the first important legislation in India. And that is where from we say evolution of the rights of the labor started. Of course, we had Workers' Compensation Act of 1923, which was only to provide workers some compensation in the event of disablement or death, in accidents arising out of and in the course of the employment, and also because of the occupational diseases that the workers would contract. But that was only as a form of a social security measure. But important thing that happened in India was primarily passing of the Trade Unions Act 1926. Now, Trade Unions Act gave legitimacy to the workers to form association. And the definition of trade union was wide enough, not only to provide right to the workers, but also right to the employers to form trade unions. And it also gave, and I think that is the heart of the matter, it provided for registration of trade unions, it provided procedure and authority for registration of trade unions, and it gave immunity to the registered trade union, their office bearers and members, against general law liability of conspiracy in tort, conspiracy in crime, and restraint of trade principles if their acts were in furtherance or contemplation of a trade dispute. I don't want to take you to this aspect in a more broader manner, but just to tell you two important aspects that you need to look at, which are very important for us to understand. What were considered to be illegal bodies became legal bodies. And therefore, the first right of the workers to form association, and these associations were primarily to replace individual bargaining by collective bargaining. And for collective bargaining, they needed to have strength. For collective bargaining, they needed to have immunities against the general law liabilities which were given to them in the form of section 17, 18, and 19 of the Trade Unions Act. Of course, registration of trade union is optional. There is no compulsion to register trade union, but every association is not entitled to registration. It must fulfill the requirements of the Act, must fall within the definition of the trade union, only then it will be entitled to registration. But once it is registered, it becomes a body corporate with the right to sue or right to obligation to be sued. Those are conditions you can look at yourself. I need not to go into that aspect. I just want to tell you something. I just want to take you to the preamble to the Act. The preamble to the Act provided an Act to provide for registration of trade unions, and in certain matters define the law relating to registered trade unions. Therefore, the very preamble says it does not define all the law relating to registered trade unions. It defines law only with respect to registered trade union in certain matters. Now, what are the other matters that were left out by this legislation? And that is very important aspect that I just want to highlight. It left the recognition of trade union law. There was no provision dealing with the recognition, and you must know there's a distinction between registration and recognition of trade union. Every recognized trade union has to be a registered trade union, but every registered trade union cannot be a recognized trade union. There can be only one recognized trade union at a given point of time. It's like, industrial democracy and political democracy. In the parliament or legislature, there can be many political parties which are registered with the Election Commission of India, but there can be only one party which will be the majority party, which will form the government, which will speak for the people of India, which will be the representative of the people of India. Similarly, once a trade union is recognized, it becomes representative of all the workers, irrespective of the fact whether they are the members of that union or not. I'll come back to this discussion at some point of time, but attempt to fill in these gaps. Now, this is very important for me to tell you at this stage. Importance because in 1947, an amendment was made in the Trade Unions Act, where they brought in all those aspects which were left out in 26. And those were in the form of, in fact, I would say, three important pillars for industrial democracy. One, recognition of trade unions. Second, there's always a temptation on the part of the employer to abuse his managerial prerogatives, managerial rights. Those are what we call as, popularly we'll call these things as unfair labor practices, prevention of unfair labor practice. And third was statutorily providing for collective bargaining. Now, this was very important, tried to bring in Indian law on the same lines as was the National Labor Relations Act 1935 of United States. But this became a part of the statute book, but it was not notified in view of the fact that there was a lot of conflict among us, the various trade unions and the political parties. This very important amendment, which had become part of the statute, could not become the law of the land. But I will take you why I say about it, because I will tell you that Supreme Court at later stage, as and when I go to that stage, takes judicial notice of some of these aspects of the amendment and builds up a body of law on unfair labor practices. Please bear with me for some time. So therefore, I'm only just on one aspect of the matter. So far, I have dealt with you is right of the workers to form unions, right of the workers to get themselves registered if they are eligible, right of the workers to organize themselves and collectively bargain, provided they have that status of a bargaining agent, and to get the immunity if they act in furtherance of the trade union objective as laid down in the Trade Unions Act, a very important aspect. I stop at here because I will come back to this stage when I move slightly ahead. In between, what happened in 1946, of course, in 1936, another important right accrued to the workers, because one of the worst thing that used to happen to the workers is one, that they would get low wages, and second was that employers would deduct unauthorized deductions from their wages, therefore they would hardly get anything in hand. So therefore a legislation was passed in the form of Payment of Wages Act 1936, where under Section 7 only those deductions are authorized which are envisaged in Section 7. All other deductions are unauthorized deduction, and if you make the deduction, it is recoverable, and also it is a penal provisions have been made in the Payment of Wages Act. I don't want to deal with this aspect in much length, but only just one point that I want to say. This act was basically to ensure that what was the agreed wage between the employer and workman that was paid without making unauthorized deductions from those wages to ensure that the worker gets only those wages which are payable to him under the contract of employment without unauthorized deductions. This is one aspect that I wanted to take up. Third aspect that I just want to take up is, under Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act 1946, this was a legislation which was passed to make certain subject matters on which the employer would submit the draft standing orders to the authorities under the Act in respect of the matters laid down in the schedule to the Act. And there would be uniformity of service conditions. Now, this is another important thing. Otherwise, there could be discrimination among us, the workers, on the terms and conditions of employment. So therefore, those establishments which were covered under this Act, employer was under duty within 6 months to get the certified standing orders, which would also provide procedure for taking disciplinary action against the workers for misconducts. And those certified standing orders would also have uniformity in the matter of application of the service condition to the employees. This was another aspect. Just wanted to take you slightly back. In 1929, there was a Trade Disputes Act 1929 passed, which provided for conciliation as a mechanism for settlement of dispute, but did not provide for any adjudication machinery under this. But came the next situation was the Second World War. Again, the problems because of the accumulation of the stocks in the textile industry, many disputes came up, and therefore 81A had to be of the Defense of India rules, which provided for compulsory adjudication, was invoked, and ultimately it came as a part of a legislation called Industrial Disputes Act 1947. And this is a very important legislation, and I will deal with extensively with this legislation with you today. And this legislation was very important things. All these legislations are pre-independence legislations. And these legislations continue to be in operation even today. We have not replaced them in the free India, any of these legislation, except that we have from time to time been amending these laws. Now, therefore, how do we deal with these matters? This is something which is very important for me to deal with you. Two important events took place. And I am just developing the subject, and then I will take you to the fascinating areas of these subjects. One was the Factories Act of 1948. That was safety, welfare measures provided. Another was a very important legislation called the Minimum Wages Act. Minimum Wages Act 48 gave a machinery for fixing minimum wages below which no employer would be having any right to employ workers, and if he would pay less than minimum wage, that was recoverable. Important development that I want to build up for my future discussions with you. So this is another aspect that I just want to highlight. Then came Indian independence. Then we started working on our constitution. Then we drafted a constitution. We had vision that we had and the kind of the society that justice, equality before law, equal protection of law, equal opportunities to the people, all these kinds of laudable objectives. We have two important chapters. One, and we have directive principles of state policy. And you will find in both these chapters, as well as the preamble to the Constitution of India, the rights of the labor. When we talk about social justice, when we talk about right to form association, When we talk about state's obligation to provide human conditions of work, equal pay for equal work, living wage as a ideal to be achieved by the state, protection of people from exploitation, Article 23, 24, protection of the children. Now, all those aspects are very important in building up a edifice for a good labor jurisprudence. And this is where our journey starts now. Keeping in view the legislations that we have, which were not based upon any articulate, rationalized policy of the state, but were passed from time to time to meet the timely situations, needs. But now came our journey when we adopted a Constitution of India. We had to read all these provisions, all these statutes, and build an edifice for developing a humane labor jurisprudence in this country. And I must say, Indian Supreme Court rose to the occasion. And I will divide the Supreme Court of India into two phases. One, I will say pre-globalization phase. Second, I will say post-globalization phase. And when I talk about COVID-19, I talk about COVID-19 as a part of the post-globalization phase. And that is why in the Supreme Court, you find when we are dealing with today in state migrant workers walking on the roads, you find Supreme Court was already having a philosophy during this period, non-interference with the policies of the government. And you see Supreme Court dithering initially, finally then Supreme Court intervenes, so moto. That's a chapter which I will take towards the end. And this is also reflected in the ordinances that have been passed by some of the states which want to keep for 3 years in suspension most of the labor legislations, and therefore suspension of most of the fundamental rights or most of the labor rights during this period, which is a matter to which I will come in the end. But before I go to that phase, let me talk about pre-globalization phase. I want to take you to the first case that went to the federal court, which subsequently became the Supreme Court. I'll come to this question about whether it works for labor or not in the end, but I will come back to that stage later on. But let me go in this manner. I just wanted to draw your attention to those of you who are really interested in understanding the labor jurisprudence of this country. There was a case called Western India Automobile Association versus National Industrial Tribunal. It was a federal court decision of 1949. It is AIR 1949 Federal Court 111. It's a beautiful case. In this case, what was the challenge before the federal court? Was the award of the Labor Industrial Tribunal, where they had awarded reinstatement, back wages, continuity of service in favor of the workmen whose termination of service was considered determined illegal by the Industrial Tribunal. And the federal court said, and this is where, unlike civil court, federal court read the powers of the Industrial Tribunal as very wide, and said, federal court said that industrial tribunals under the Industrial Disputes Act 1947 have the power to rewrite the contract of employment, to modify the contract of employment. And this is a power which vests in the Industrial Tribunal, and they can give a relief by way of reinstatement, back wages, continuity of service. If you look at the Specific Reliefs Act, which provides that personal contracts are not specifically enforceable, therefore, Industrial Disputes Act became an exception to the provision of the Specific Reliefs Act, which says that the personal contracts cannot be specifically enforced. Now, this was an extraordinary remedy. This was an extraordinary relief which was upheld by the federal court. And from there starts a very beautiful journey of industrial adjudication in this country. Immediately thereafter comes the case of Bharat Bank versus the workmen of Bharat Bank, employees of Bharat Bank. This is a case which is of 1950. And it was a case where the Supreme Court had to interpret Article 136 of the Constitution. Now, what does this case say? Article 136 says, Supreme Court may in its discretion grant special leave to appeal against any judgment, order, determination, sentence passed by a court or tribunal. The question before the court was whether tribunal includes only judicial forums or it includes quasi-judicial forum, and whether the industrial tribunal or labor courts are quasi-judicial forums. The court held the tribunal includes quasi-judicial forums. And therefore, Supreme Court, since it had just started working, did not have much of work at the beginning, started entertaining awards of the labor court and industrial tribunal right from the lowest to the highest court. And this was an opportunity for the Supreme Court of India to lay down the uniform labor law for the country, which would be binding on all courts by virtue of Article 141 of the Constitution. A very beautiful thing that happened was from the lowest court, you could go to the highest court, and Supreme Court would entertain, and that is why you find most of the law that has been laid down by the Supreme Court in collective industrial disputes has been by virtue of this provision of Article 136 in the Constitution of India. I will come to it later. Along with this journey, I mentioned to you there was an act called the Minimum Wages Act 1948, which was passed. And along with that legislation, there was a committee set up by the government of India called Committee on Fair Wages. And that committee gave its recommendation for fixing wages over and above minimum wage, and gave also the formula how it has to be settled. It also gave a bill, but that was not to become the law, but Supreme Court took the judicial notice of it. This is how you see proactive court. When a court has to be proactive, it knows how to make the law. It knows how to settle the rules of the game, which would be operational in the industry and would be something to rely upon at all times to come. I would certainly like to immediately go to another case, and that was one of the best trendsetters in this country. The constitutional validity of Minimum Wages Act 1948 came to be challenged before the Supreme Court on the ground that the employees have a right to carry on trade and business. And if you force them to pay minimum wage, which is beyond their capacity to pay, it's an unreasonable restriction violative of their fundamental right. My dear friends, is a very fantastic subject, but unfortunately people find it very technical subject. This is a subject which is connected with each one of us. It is connected with the last man which Gandhiji talked about. And therefore, I think this subject must be read like you read the Constitution of India. Because this has everything to do with the Constitution of India. We, the people of India, are asking for what you promised us: socio-economic political justice, equality before law and equal opportunity. You must give us all those dreams and you must fulfill all those dreams. And those duties are the footnotes in the form of fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy to the preamble to the Constitution of India. And when this matter came to be challenged, Vijay Cotton versus Mills versus State of Ajmer, AIR 1955, Supreme Court 25. It also came in another case, Edward Mills versus State of Kashmir, AIR 1955, Supreme Court 32. The Supreme Court said, yes, right to carry on business is your fundamental right, but it is not absolute right. This is subject to reasonable restriction. And Minimum Wages Act is a reasonable restriction. Right to carry on business does not mean right to exploit. And if you cannot pay minimum wage, you have no right to exist. And minimum wage has to be paid irrespective of the capacity of the employer to pay. My friends, this is the beginning of a great jurisprudence that the Supreme Court evolved. And that is how you find in later judgment Supreme Court saying, taking judicial notice of the Committee of Fair Wages, it said at the bottom of the ladder is the minimum wage. At the top of the ladder is Article 43, which provides living wage as the ideal to be achieved by the Indian society. But in between these two is what we call as fair wage. And that has to be paid on the basis of the capacity of the employer to pay. If an employer's capacity goes high, he has to pay fair wage. And that, of course, on the basis of industry conversion formula as provided by the Committee on Fair Wages. Another beautiful thing in between that you find happening, rights of the workers. Industrial adjudication having taken off. Labor Appellate Tribunal gave a formula in 1950. And that is how, bonus, which was being paid as an ex gratia payment by the employers to the workers on being happy with them, not dependent upon the right of the workers, but as an ex gratia payment. LAT said, now it has accrued as a legal right. And it said, where there is a profit shown after the prior deductions, and rehabilitation was one of the prior deductions, if there's an available surplus, you have to give allocable surplus by way of bonus to the workers. And also, they brought in the concept of dearness allowance. You see, without a legislation, how the rights of the workers came to be recognized. They said dearness allowance has to be paid wherever there is a rise in the cost of living, to neutralize the cost of living. So therefore, to have the real wage, money wage plus dearness allowance, and to fill the gap between the actual wage and the living wage, bonus. Bonus is dependent upon the profits, and that is the productivity of the worker. Now, this is how the rights of the workers started growing and came to be recognized. And Supreme Court also in Associated Cement Company's case recognized the right of the workers to bonus as a legal right. But since the rehabilitation cost had become one of the controversial areas and employers had become rehabilitation cost conscious, it said you set up a important commission. Therefore, we had the bonus commission. Then we had the Payment of Bonus Act 1965. And there you find 8.33 deferred wage. Bonus became a deferred wage over the period of time. This is one of the aspects that I want you to take up. Now, when coming to the scope of the application of the Industrial Disputes Act, because ID Act provides for mechanism for settlement of industrial disputes. Those of you who have dealt with the cases under the ID Act will find we have two types of machineries provided under the Act. One is conciliation. Second is adjudication. Adjudication is compulsory adjudication or voluntary adjudication. We have voluntary arbitration under the ID Act, Section 10A. But ID Act will apply provided it is a dispute in an industry. Provided the dispute is an industrial dispute. Provided the dispute relates to the workman. You must see how much conceptual the whole aspect is. Dispute must be in an industry. The dispute must be an industrial dispute. The dispute must relate to the workman. Now you have to see all these things. But just take up only one or two, very passing. I don't want to spend more time on it. I just want to tell you how the Supreme Court has developed the concepts. And by widening the concepts, definitions, they have ensured, at least in the organized sector, workers, more and more workers get the benefit of these legislation. When we go to the definition of industry, we start with the first case called D.N. Banerjee. Pass through Hospital Mazdoor Sabha. Go to Delhi University. Go to solicitor's case. Go to Safdarjung Hospital. Go to Bangalore Water Supply, and then go to Jaiveers. I just don't want to spend more time on it, except that I say most of the disputes you will find that came before the court were not with respect to Mafatlal, were not relating to Reliance, were not relating to the private sector, were not relating to the MNCs, but were government departments, were public sector undertakings, were welfare functions of the state, and also some of the sovereign functions of the state. The court said the word undertaking used in the definition is very wide, but cannot include every activity undertaken, but must take color from the words before and after it. And therefore, it has to be something like analogous to trade or business. What is analogous to trade or business? The court said, birds of the same feather must flock together. It said, an activity which qualifies triple test, organized activity, cooperation between employer and employee to provide goods and services, including material services. Does not matter there are no profits, does not matter there is no capital investment, as long as it provides service to the society at large, provides goods to the society at large, it is industry. And that is how court said hospitals are industry. Court said corporations are industry. What is not industry? Welfare activities are industry, but sovereign functions are not industry. Domestic services are not industry, because those are personal services. But what is difference between welfare functions and sovereign functions of the state? Court said, any activity which can be undertaken by private individual, even if it is exclusively taken over by the state, it is a welfare activity. But what is a sovereign function is what is inalienable, inescapable constituent function of a government. Wars are not merchantable. Justice is not saleable. They're all sovereign functions of the state. But let me come to the most important aspect of the matter. You see, collective bargaining presupposes there is a meeting of the parties to settle the disputes. And you can't tell an employer, please come and let us discuss. He will not come. Employer will not force the employees to come. So therefore, collective bargaining requires certain actions both on the part of the employer and employee. And this is where I'm talking about the rights that accrue to the labor. Right to strike and correspondingly right to lockout have been recognized as first a common law right, then a legal right. I just want to draw your attention to some cases of the Supreme Court. And that is B.R. Singh versus Trade Fair Authority of India. 1989 4 SCC 710. And it's a very beautiful case, which I just want to read only 2 lines from this judgment. Just give me 2 seconds only. The right to form association and unions and to provide for their registration was recognized, obviously for conferring certain rights on the trade unions. The necessity to form union is obviously for voicing the demands of the and grievances of the labor. Trade unions act as a mouthpiece of labor. The strength of the trade union depends upon its membership. Trade unions with sufficient membership strength are able to bargain more effectively with the management, and therefore right to strike is over the period of considered to be as an important right, but it must be resorted as a last measure. Now, this is what I just wanted to tell you, that another very important development that has come to be recognized is collective bargaining presupposes right of the workers to resort to industrial action as a last measure, after having resorted to all other measures available to bring the employer round the table. Now, Indian law, under the Industrial Disputes Act, puts 22-23 of the IT Act certain prohibitions on right to strike. And 22 are general 23 are general prohibitions, 22 is in public utility services. And because of that, Indian Supreme Court has, this is an innovative thought, because under the ID Act is primarily a law in the interest of the society. This is what has been decided by the Supreme Court in Rohtas Industry Staff Association versus State of Bihar. ID Act is primarily to see that people are not inconvenienced. So therefore, they have a free flow of services and goods available to them, in especially public utility services. So therefore, legality or illegality of a strike is a question of law, whether you are complied with 22-23. But Supreme Court has brought in another concept. It says a strike must be legal and justified. And justification of a strike is when a strike is object of the strike. What is the object of the strike? And it has a great importance on what will have the effect on the contract of employment. And India is the only country where judiciary has recognized the right of the workers to full wages during the period of the strike if it is legal and justified. This is a very important right that you cannot deny. If a strike is legal and unjustified, you will not get wages. If a lockout is legal and justified, you will not get wages during the lockout period. If a lockout follows an illegal strike, the lockout is always justified and no wages. Now, why has the Supreme Court or industrial adjudication in India accepted workers' right to get wages during the strike period. It is a matter which needs to be looked at. There was a case, T.S. Kelewala, where the Supreme Court said we will apply no work, no pay. And therefore workers will not get wages even if the strike is legal. But this was immediately followed, which reviewed this judgment. And court did not overrule this judgment, but they said this argument of legal and justice. Kuldeep Singh was the author in both these judgments. I think Justice Sawant and Justice Kuldeep Singh. So the point I'm trying to say is a very important innovative judicial activism. If a strike is legal and justified, workers are entitled to full wages during the strike period. What is the justification? The justification is this. We in this country, for our workers. And if COVID-19 situation is any example to you, you will find the sufferings of the workers during the COVID-19. They had to walk miles and miles and hundreds of miles because there were no nets to take care of them. Once the establishments were closed because the government declared lockdown. So therefore, if the workers have to sustain their legitimate demands, pursue their path for collective bargaining, adopt coercive measures wherever justified, this right came to be recognized as a very important right. And therefore, another important right through judicial innovation, in absence of a statutory provision, is this right of workers. Once there is a legal and justified strike, the effect on the contract of employment is that you don't deny wages to the workers, but they will be entitled to full wages during the strike period. A very important right. I will go now to 3-4 important aspects. And those are, in the industrial law parlance, we have a concept called layoff, retrenchment, and closure. Now you must have recently seen during COVID-19, when the Government of India notification came asking the employers to pay full wages to the workers during the COVID-19 lockdown period. Many of these notifications, many petitions came to be filed before the Supreme Court. And in some of these petitions, argument of the management is, we are prepared to pay them 50%, but we cannot pay them 100%. Why? This is a justification. I'm not saying on the merits of the matter is sub judice. I don't go on the merits of the matter. But kindly see, 3 important aspects that were brought by 1953 amendment to the ID Act were in the form of Chapter 5A. Now, Chapter 5A says workers will be entitled to retrenchment compensation, those who have put in 1 year of continuous 12 months continuous service. Then continuous service is defined in section 25B to 40 days in 12 calendar months preceding the date of the retrenchment. They shall be given 1 month's notice stating the reason of retrenchment or 1 month's wages in lieu of the notice, and 15 days wages for every year of continuous service, and a notice to the appropriate government. This is 25F. This is retrenchment. And when this matter came before the Supreme Court in number of cases up to Punjab Land Development Corporation, which is a constitution bench judgment, the Supreme Court said these are condition precedent. If you have not complied with before effecting retrenchment, retrenchment is bad. Non-honest worker will be entitled to back wages, continuity of service, reinstatement. Now, this is the right for non-complying with retrenchment compensation provisions. Similarly, the Act provides for layoff compensation. 50% of the wages plus dearness allowance minus the holidays that may intervene. And when the court held that retrenchment can happen in a continuing business. And when the employer closes the employment, it is not retrenchment, it is closure. Therefore, a new provision was brought into the ID Act in the form of 25FF and 25FFF on closure and transfer of undertaking compensation payable. These are the rights that have accrued to the workers under the Industrial Disputes Act. Therefore, you can see that over the period of time, these are the compensation. When we say retrenchment compensation, what is retrenchment compensation? It's a compensation as a social security measure for the job lost and job found. That's why Supreme Court has interpreted these provisions strictly. But after the liberalization, globalization period, now reinstatement and back wages has become an exception. It has become an exception. And what the court now awards is compensation. And my submission is compensation must be on some equitable grounds, on some well-settled grounds. Now, that is where I have some submissions to make, that court must not just because it says 1 lakh, 2 lakh, 3 lakh, 4 lakh, there must be some justified basis, justification, and the basis on which you can calculate this compensation. And second, it must be a deterrent compensation. Otherwise, you terminate services of the employee today and after 20 years, he gets 1 lakh or 2 lakhs of rupees. It's not worth fighting this battle. It is not protecting the rights of the labor. It is just, compensating him somehow. Other aspect that I just want to take up is a very important aspect is, and these are the matters which are disputed, matters of subject matter of litigation in labor courts, industrial tribunals, and High Court and Supreme Court. Only these kinds of disputes are available now. Those are cases relating to disciplinary actions. We have in 1971 a new provision brought in the Industrial Disputes Act in the form of 11A, which is based upon the recommendation 119 of the ILO. And this provision makes a great departure in the law that existed on illegal terminations, dismissal and discharges. Up to 1971, like High Court, labor courts exercise only supervisory jurisdiction over the action of the management. Disciplining an employee was the managerial prerogative. Labor court or industrial tribunal could only exercise the supervisory jurisdiction and interfere only in 4 situations. 1, where there was violation of principles of natural justice in conducting the departmental inquiry, where there was bias, mala fide, where it was a case of victimization, or the punishment was so disproportionate that it would shake the conscience of the judge. Only on 4 grounds: victimization, mala fide, violation of principles of natural justice, perverse finding, and disproportionate punishment. The court could not, labor court could not reappreciate the evidence. If proving of the misconduct was a plausible conclusion, it had to uphold the action of the employer. And a very important aspect still, which is different from the High Court jurisdiction that they exercise in the civil service matters. If an inquiry was not held, it could be for the first time held before the labor court or industrial tribunal. In that case, it would be the satisfaction of the labor court or industrial tribunal. Please appreciate it. But ILO wanted a better relief to the workers. And therefore, it said it must have a right to appeal before an appellate body rather than a supervisory body. And that is the spirit of 11A. And if you read 11A, it makes 2 departures, and this is what Supreme Court has not appreciated in many of the judgments. And this is what I used to tell at National Judicial Academy in presence of Justice Sinha. I used to say it to the Supreme Court judges in National Judicial Academy. I said, kindly read, bare reading of 11A makes 2 changes obvious. One, it sits as an appellate body. And it can reappreciate the evidence, come to a different conclusion on the proof of the misconduct. A very important facet of the law which has developed after 1971, but Supreme Court in many cases has overlooked it. And therefore there has been injustice in many cases. Not only that, equally important change that has taken place in law is it can reduce the quantum of punishment. Even if the employer has held the domestic inquiry in accordance with principles of natural justice, even if misconduct is proved to the satisfaction of the labor court or industrial tribunal. But if the labor court or industrial tribunal comes to the conclusion that the punishment given by the management is disproportionate, it can award lesser punishment which High Court cannot do, which Supreme Court cannot do, unless it says 142. That is why Justice Singhvi, in Harjinder Singh's case, and this is why he said to the High Court very nicely, Harjinder Singh versus Punjab State Wear Corporation. This is 2010 3 SCC 192. He says your powers are not as wide as labor court or industrial tribunal. He says to the high courts, very clearly he says it. He says your powers are narrow under 226, 227. Keep your hands up. Don't ordinarily interfere with the findings of the labor court and industrial tribunal. Only in 4 conditions: perverse, exceeding jurisdiction, violation or not applying the law properly, but don't interfere ordinarily with the findings of the Labour Court Industrial Tribunal. A very beautiful judgment. And also, said to the Supreme Court and High Courts, don't be carried away by globalization and liberalization. Don't whittle down the rights of the labor. I think I want to read one para from there. And this is what I want to tell you, young lawyers. Labor law is so closely connected with the life of each one of us. And yet we have ignored this area. It is the life and soul. I just want to read out one few lines from Justice Singhvi. Of late, there has been a visible shift in court's approach in dealing with the cases involving the interpretation of social welfare legislations. The attractive mantra of globalization and liberalization are fast becoming the raison d'etre of the judicial process, and an impression has been created that the constitutional courts are no longer sympathetic towards the plight of the industrial and unorganized workers. In large number of cases, like the present one, mark the words, relief has been denied to the employees, falling in the category of workmen who are illegally retrenched from service by creating by-lanes and side lanes. In the jurisprudence developed by this court in 3 decades, brick by brick, the stock plea raised by the public employer in such cases is that initial employment engagement of the workman was contrary to some of the other statute or reinstatement of workman will put unreasonable burden on the financial health of the workman. The courts have readily accepted such plea, unmindful of the accountability of the wrongdoer, and indirectly punished this tiny beneficiary of the wrong, ignoring the fact that he may have continued in employment for years together and the micro wages earned by him may be the only source of the livelihood. Mark the words, this is sensitivity of the judge. This is how the rights of the labor cannot be compromised. You cannot dilute them. If he has a right, enforce his right. Don't dilute his right. Now I just wanted to come back to my discussion. There is a judgment of the Supreme Court. There is a judgment of the Supreme Court, Firestone Tire Rubber Company, case 1973, Justice Vidyalingam's judgment. And that judgment on 11A, I just wanted to draw your attention to that judgment. If you want, I can refer to that judgment. Yes. (1973), 1 SCC 813. Please read this judgment. Those of you who have interest in this subject, those of you who want to see some of the judgments of the Supreme Court to be corrected. He refers to the judgment of Indian Iron and Steel Company versus the workmen, which is AIR 1958, Supreme Court 130, which gives the law prior to 1971. You see, I have studied this subject for 40 years. I have written on this subject for 40 years. And every year I write for Indian Law Institute, Annual Survey of Indian Law, Labor Law, this subject, Industrial Relations Law. And I have analyzed each and every judgment and every nook and corner of a judgment. And this is with authority I am saying. That Supreme Court is not able to distinguish between the jurisdiction of the High Court and Labor Court Industrial Tribunal. You see, Firestone Tire Rubber Company case clearly says ILO recommendation 119 has been given effect to in section 11A, and it is an appellate power, and therefore it is not to be confused with the supervisory power. Your Central Administrative Tribunal, your State Administrative Tribunal, your High Court in service matters exercise supervisory jurisdiction. But when Labor Court sits, Industrial Tribunal sits over the action of the employer, he sits as an appellate authority. So this is the distinction. This is the importance that you must understand. Supreme Court has in many cases treated it as a supervisory jurisdiction. So therefore, this concept of distinction between appellate and supervisory jurisdiction has to be appreciated. And look here, the right that has accrued to the worker now is much beyond what is available to the civil servants under Article 311. And this is where we have to be able to distinguish between when you sit over the action of or decision of a labor court industrial tribunal, or you sit over the action of a high court judgment or central administrative tribunal judgment. This is where I just wanted now 2-3 things which I just want to quickly take up. Have I exceeded the time?
No, sir, it doesn't matter. The way you are putting things across, it's a wide spectrum, so time will never be a constraint. And
no, I just want to take up a very important aspects, that is a very, through public interest litigation, the development of labor law, especially when we are talking about interstate migrant workers. I want to take up 2 cases. One was a shared workers case. Second was Salal Hydroelectric Power Project. Now these are 2 beautiful cases. And I will compare them with post-globalization period and warn you that these attempts on the part of the states to take us back to the laissez-faire era is something this should not be allowed to happen. Because that will be dealing with the basic structure of the Indian Constitution, violating the basic structure of the Constitution, violating the fundamental rights. Now let me take. Now Interstate Migrant Workers Act 1979 has a definition of interstate migrant worker, which is of course not what we understand as interstate migrant worker. Now interstate migrant worker is one who is engaged by a contractor in one state under a contract and is asked to work in another state. And his employment starts from the time when he is engaged in that state. And the liability of the principal employer to see him back into that state, and when he reaches his home, mark the words of COVID-19. If that would have been the situation, it was the liability of the employer, and every bit of expense was to be incurred by the principal employer and that contractor. Now, let us go to a shared workers case, a public interest litigation. On the basis of the research conducted by 3 social scientists, PUDR sends a letter to the Supreme Court and says that there is violation of the basic rights of the workers. Now, you know, Shed 82, for construction, you had engaged Delhi State, Delhi Development Authority, Municipal Corporation of Delhi, and they had in turn also taken certain contractors. They had engaged people who were being paid less than minimum wage. They had engaged women workers who were paid less than the men. And they had contracted child workers. And the Supreme Court said, now this is again innovative aspect that I just want to highlight. You know, Supreme Court said, paying of wages less than minimum wage means begar and violative of Article 23. You see how you build up the fundamental right jurisprudence, human right jurisprudence. So they are amenable to Article 32 jurisdiction. Denial of equal pay for equal work. Violative of Article 1421. Therefore, amenable to the jurisdiction of Article 32. Engaging child labor amounted to violation of Article 24. So all fundamental rights. Therefore, you can see labor rights becoming fundamental rights and therefore violative of the fundamental rights. This is a shared workers case. This is Salal project, hydro projects case where the Supreme Court enforced the rights of the migrant workers in this way. And they said migrant workers are entitled to the benefits of section 16, 17. They have to be paid salary, transportation allowance. They have to pay wages during the period of the travel. Now this is how rights of the workers came to be enforced by under Article 32 of the Constitution. And let me take you to another case and come to then post globalization, and I'm through with that. I'll just take you not more than 5 or 7 minutes. There was another case which went to the Supreme Court, and that is very beautiful again, which case which we must look at. This is called just give me a second. This is called National Textile Workers Union versus PR Ramakrishnan. A very beautiful case. There was a winding up proceedings initiated in the company court. In fact, first, workers who whose livelihood was involved. They wanted that they should be given a right of hearing. The High Court said, you have no status, no locus. They said, you have no locus. There is no provision in the Companies Act which gives you locus, therefore you cannot participate in the winding up proceedings. The matter went to the Supreme Court Constitution Bench. Majority 4 judges. They held, all right, Companies Act does not specifically state they have a right to be heard, but it does not deny also right of hearing. At the same time, their right to livelihood is at stake. Understand? Their right to livelihood is at stake. Therefore, they must be heard, especially when there is no provision specifically prohibiting them being heard under the Companies Act. Now, Supreme Court said, yes, they have a right of hearing. Now, this is beauty. A right of livelihood, came to be recognized as a fundamental right. And right of hearing, audi alteram peritum, fundamental principle of fair play. And whole labor law, criminal law, any law is based upon the principle of audi alteram peritum. Now let me come to post-globalization. There was a case called Balco. Balco Employees Union Registered versus Union of India, 2002, 2 SCC 333. Now, the government decided to de-invest. And the workers said, before de-investing, please hear us. The management said, nothing doing. Even though there is a provision called workers. A. Is it 43A or 34? I think it's workers' participation in management. (43A). 39A is legal aid. Now, court said, policy decision. They tried to rely upon Ramakrishna's case, Textile Corporation. They said distinguishable. They tried to bring in assured workers. They said distinguishable. And that is how the court started getting policy matters into the play, and therefore court said we cannot interfere with the policy decisions. Rangarajan was another case. We had centuries to fight for right to strike, and came Rangarajan's case, and Supreme Court said employees in Tamil Nadu, whether working in corporations or otherwise, have no right to go on strike. Fundamental right, no equitable right, no statutory right, no other right. And this is how we started diluting the rights of the workers. And only last case, which I just want to read, only 2 lines from that case, that is UP Brassware. I'll just take only 2-3 minutes and then I'll come to those ordinances. Just a second, please. I'm just trying to spot it. Yeah. Before adverting to the decisions relied. Now, this is what I said. There was a time, golden time in the history of labor law development, jurisprudence, when courts would ordinarily award reinstatement, back wages, continuity of service. But now it has become an exception. Now we pay compensation, but we do not know what is the basis of fixing that compensation. It depends upon how good the sensitive the judge is. So therefore you will get good compensation. So all those things. Before adverting to decisions relied upon by the learned counsel for the parties, we may observe that although directions to pay full back wages on a declaration that the order of termination was invalid used to be the usual rule, but now I'm talking about post-globalization. With the passage of time, a pragmatic view of the matter is being taken by the court, realizing that an industry may not be compelled to pay to the workman for a period during which he apparently contributed little or nothing at all to it, and for a period that was spent unproductively, as a result whereof the employer would be compelled to go back to a situation which prevailed many years ago, namely when the workman was retrenched. So this is the new philosophy of the court. If an employer terminates illegally, if the person has been kept away from the job for such a long period of time illegally, should you not be asked to pay deterrent compensation? Should you not be asked to pay heavy compensation so that you are deterred from adopting such tactics in future? Now, this is my question which I am raising, but now finally let me come. These are hard fought labor rights over the century. Now, if in one brush, these states, because the word is going around that they want to invite FDI from China, some companies which are wanting to get out of China, and they want this investment to be made in India, and our employers want there should be a holiday from labor law for 3 years. Should we should we do it? Should we allow to do it? I don't think we should be allowed. Government should be allowed. I don't think central government should allow them to go ahead with this, because labor is in the concurrent list. There are central legislations already there. There are central legislations already there, and state laws should not be allowed to dilute the central laws. And especially when the central government is thinking of coming with 4 courts with fresh air and new look to the labor laws. I think we need to have deeper thought in it. Let us see how we can sit and try to find a solution where we have economic growth, but it has to be inclusive economic growth. Growth not at the cost of the social justice, not social justice at the cost of the growth. We have to harmonize the interest of all the sections of the stakeholders, be it community, be it employer, be it state, be it employees. How best can we find a way forward so that all stakeholders are getting equitable justice in the matter? That is my concern so far as this topic, this subject is concerned, about rights of the labor and the matters that we have seen in COVID-19, the situation of the labor. We talked about only organized labor. If this is the position of the organized labor, what is the position of the unorganized labor, especially when every day we find contract workers, contract labor, contractual labor are being put in place of the regular labor, and we have now more of Contract Labor Regulation Abolition Act 1970 in use and misuse, and we should not allow it to happen. And I think we should have very good discussion, such kinds of webinars where I should get a feedback from all of you. I should also
request you to think about what I talk to you. You may not accept all my ideas, but you must at least give patient hearing to me and give responses to what I have said to you today. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
At the first outset, I will say that we have all accepted the way you have put across the things, and there couldn't have been any exception in that way. That is the first take which I can give to that. But undoubtedly, with the flux of time, what I've seen, what you have stated therein of Section 25F, Quasi Industrial Dispute Act, after which you refer to Harjinder Singh's judgment. The one aspect which has been said that there are certain cases, since I have also been defending for the workmen as well as for the management, there are certain cases, because we all know the tedious time what takes in the industrial disputes and the rigor modes of that. So in that eventuality, there are judgments, latest of one Madhya Pradesh Supreme Court with 3 judges judgment, which said that let's assume you have only worked for 1 year and your reinstatement took around 25 years.
No, I
So
don't say I don't say you reinstate him. I say every employer must be deterred from resorting to these kinds of actions. Don't act illegally. That's my point. My point is this.
So second point, what has happened is, in certain cases, it was realized that, at least in Punjab, Haryana, I could say, I do not know how far it was correct out of this. They said invariably, sometimes deliberately the employer employed someone, saw that he got 240 days, and thereafter, knowing that he could not have been regularized, dispensed with the provisions of Section 25, knowing fully that 15 days salary, 1 month salary, and the payment immediately to be made, deliberate violations. And thereafter, so that he could be reinstated and could be regularized with the flux of time. This was also one of the gambits which, at least in the government sectors, some people played dirty with that. So there, as they say that you can only examine the smoke, you cannot actually see where the fire was. So these are the issues which actually happened. And that is why the courts...
Let me tell you one thing. There used to be a time when a lot of cases from ID Act would be collective disputes, because ID Act deals only with collective disputes. But what is happening now? You have all disputes that come from ID Act are deemed industrial dispute. They are actually individual disputes. Therefore, I always say 2 things must have happened. Either the workers are very satisfied and they say, now we don't have any litigation. Or second is they are very satisfied that no justice can be procured after 20 years. You know, you have to wait for 20 years. So better do not go to the court. I don't see. Second situation is very, I want my courts to be honored, respected, and people should have access to courts. People should have respect for the courts. People should believe that we dispense justice. That is my concern.
That's true, sir. And as you said, another aspect, I've seen that there's a lot of, so Section 18 of the Industrial Dispute Act discusses as to once this thing there, but there's a lot of very few judgments on that effect, that what is the effect of Section 18 as to once there is a collective understanding, all the principally the union has agreed upon that. And
this 18 deals with the binding nature of the settlements.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's what I'm trying to say.
Awards and settlements.
Yeah. Invariably, you will find that people, once there is a settlement agreed upon, especially in the banking sector,
you have to register it. No, those are national unions. You see, bank settlements come at national level. You see, service sectors have very well organized at the national level, because banks, life insurance corporations, big corporations, they're all, you know, at the central level, they enter into settlements or collective bargaining agreements. So those are cases which are very well thought of. You know, there are also very strong unions. There are also strong managements. So you enjoy those kinds of fights. You always enjoy. Those settlements are leaving a lot of scope for you and me. You know, there are many cases which come out of those settlements also. But question is, they are very, very organized sectors. We're talking about generally weaker unions. We're talking generally about disputes which are referred. Otherwise, bank cases generally don't get referred. They enter into big settlements. They are covered in 18.3, 18.1. All those kinds of settlements are, they become operational under 19.
No, but I'm saying there's quite less litigation part if you will find the judgment on the Section 18 aspect. Like
If you-
similarly, I've seen 25O is not discussed much. 25F is being discussed much. 25O and 25H,
You see,
invariably it is 25F.
because 25O, the machinery that you have provided for, the disease is worse than, the remedy is worse than the disease itself, Those you should have one within 15 days. If you don't decide that application, you must be deemed to have been permitted. That kind of a provision should always be there. It is very difficult to operationalize 25O. By the time you operationalize, unka wo period khatam ho jata hai. It is not operative in the sense it should be operative. I have my own reservations about section 25O. It's very difficult, very, very badly drafted. Very
So, sir,
badly
I'm
drafted.
saying that you will find very less judgments on 25O also
Yeah,
as
yeah.
such.
Very nice.
25O, 25H.
Yes, yes.
But invariably, you will find in the labor matter 25F. And what
Yes.
you said, a lump sum payment, and then to
Yeah, lump sum
the
payment. And yes.
the conceptual of that, the
Yes.
compensation I've seen. Off late, there is a trend. Recently, day before yesterday, a client came. He says the contractual employee's termination on the ground of corruption charges are not proved. But since he's a contractual employee, I will pay for the 4 years what you have worked for 45,000 rupees.
No, if it's a contract labor, if there's a contractual is different from contract. If I'm under a contract of employment, even if for 1 year, I'm a workman. But if I'm a contract labor, then I am not covered by the act. So my dispute will not be a dispute unless I say the termination, the showing me as a contract labor is a camouflage. Steel Authority of India says you can lift the veil and you can see from the contract whether he is actually a contract labor or he is a regular employee, but camouflaged as a contract labor. All those questions.
HSEB versus Suresh Chandra 2002 also.
That is the Steel Authority of India. That Suresh Chandra case. Yes, you're right. Yes.
HSEB versus Suresh Chandra 2002 Supreme Court.
Yes.
Which says that you have to lift the doctrine of lifting of veil.
Lift the GB Panth University also.
Yes, sir. Yes. So this is by Pankaj on the Facebook. Somehow there are not much questions on the chat box. Pankaj says, what about the unorganized sector? Whether the legislature and judiciary is ready to take care about them, or what is the way ahead?
You see, this is what I said in the beginning. Unfortunately, we do not have yet any protection to the people in the unorganized sector. We need to come out. This is what I said. COVID-19, if it has taught us anything, is that we must be very caring for the unorganized sector. We must come out with the legislation to some extent, give protection to these people also. And unless that comes, only when, these unorganized workers come in large measure, then the Supreme Court has been of late been very progressive in its approach towards this section of the people. But then, it's very difficult to bring these people together. Like suppose Safai Karmacharis Union and similar unions, which espouse the cause of the unorganized sector, they come as writ petitions. They don't come as industrial disputes.
This is by Sujata on the Facebook itself. Casual worker, does he have any right to file a case before the labor court under the Industrial Dispute Act?
No, casual worker is also a workman. There is no problem about it. Casual in the sense, as long as he is not a contract labor. Daily wager. If you say daily wager is a worker under the ID Act, there is no problem about that.
I think that 1990 Supreme Court, that 5 constitutional bench which you had referred to, that Punjab State Tubal Corporation, that deals with 25O, wherein that also deals with.
That is Punjab Land Development Corporation case.
1990 Supreme Court, which said that even
Justice
for probation, if you
Justice Sakia's judgment.
Yes, wherein specifically dealt with
Punjab
for the
Land
facilitation of the participants. You can tell that where it also dealt with that if there is a violation of 25F even for probation.
In fact, most of the retrenchment cases come from daily wagers only, casual workers only. They come from these people only.
So, for the convenience of the participants, could you just explain the difference between 200BB and the normal this thing?
Yeah. I think I'll be able to do that.
Because that will be an important.
Yeah, that's very good. Because you see, you must understand everything has a story behind it. There were some cases, there was a case called Santosh Gupta versus State Bank of India. You see, that is Justice Krishna Iyer's judgment, where for the first time Supreme Court said for any reason means beyond labor surplusage. This was a lady who was employed in the State Bank of India by broken periods, which made it to 240 days. So then they said termination can come by efflux of time. You see, suppose I give you an appointment for 10 days, then I give you another 10 days and it makes to 240 days. Last 10 days automatically brings to an end. So it makes 240 days. Now that was considered to be termination by Santosh Gupta. Just to overcome that difficulty of the Santosh Gupta, they amended 2002BB. Suppose I give you a termination order in which I state the appointment also, date also, and termination date also. So that is where stipulation to this effect in the contract of employment, they wanted to take it out of the definition of retrenchment. That was purpose of section 200BB. But then there was a judgment of Supreme Court also in the same on the same issue. There is one judgment which I just wanted to cite to you. That is where you have a post, but you just in order to avoid your liability, give him a contractual appointment for a definite period, and automatic by efflux of time his termination takes place. That is the case of State of Rajasthan versus Rameshwar Lal Gehlot, AIR 1976, Supreme Court 1001. Court said if we find that you have a post, but you are giving malafidely to this person only contractual appointment, efflux of time, you stipulate the date of termination, then it will not amount, it will amount to retrenchment, it will not be covered by 200BB. That is what is that case about. 200BB talks about fixed term appointment. Fixed term appointment is not covered by the definition of retrenchment.
So could you just explain for the participants that section 10 of the Contract Labor Act 1971?
Yeah, that is, there was.
I'm just asking the question.
No, I'm only saying it because every provision has its history. There was a case which went to the Supreme Court called Standard Vacuum Company case. Justice Gajendra Gadkar or Justice, this was Vanchu, Justice Vanchu. Standard Vacuum Company case, there were people who were these contract labor engaged for cleaning that company and the machinery of that company, and their dispute of regularization was raised by the regular employees. You see, casual employees, this what we call as contract labor cannot dispute itself. Their dispute must be raised by those who are in the contract of employment. And if they raise their dispute, Supreme Court said demand of regularization of contract labor is also industrial dispute. Then came the Contract Labor Regulation Abolition Act, Section 10, that took away the power, that effect of that judgment, because now that power was vested in the administrative central government, appropriate government, to decide whether it should abolish or it should not abolish. So therefore, those are cases which are now decided administratively and cannot be decided by judiciary in a reference made under Section 10 of the Industrial Disputes Act. But if the court comes to the conclusion that the employees are shown as contract labor but is a camouflage to do perennial nature of work, then in that case the court can lift the veil and treat them as regular employees. Now, itself is a very important area that we should always look at, and it's an area. Otherwise, now abolition of contract labor is not in the domain of the judiciary. It is not in the domain of the industrial adjudicator. It is in the administrative domain. That is Section 10 of the Contract Labor Regulation Abolition.
Sir, we will take two questions. It says, where should a senior level employee, manager and below, file case for recovery of unpaid salary? Is a civil suit maintainable, or he has to go before the labor court?
I think people must be very clearly told. It is not the designation which makes you a workman or not a workman. It is the nature of the job. Suppose your nature of job is supervisory and you are drawing salary more than 10,000 rupees, or you are mainly executive or managerial, then you are not covered by Industrial Disputes Act. You will have to go to the ordinary court. There is no provision in the ID Act where this case can be raised before the ID authorities. This case will go to the ordinary civil court for asking for what you call as suit for recovery of the money recovery suit.
It is that the private company, this is by Abhishek, the private companies were hiring qualified Indians on less than minimum wages when there were labor laws applicable. Now these are abolished. According to you, abolishment might be for new reforms?
No, you cannot engage people. You only, minimum wages act talks about scheduled industries. Then, generally we say you cannot employ a person which has been categorized as the minimum wage in that particular category. Now, if you engage less than that, I think that is very violative of the very dignity of the person. So therefore, those can be areas where you can go for violation of your human rights, but you cannot go under the ID Act.
So this is by Naveen Kumar. What can be done when the government itself is not making regular appointment and using contract workers? Examples in municipal corporations, secretariats, etc.
I wanted to take, this. You see, appointments. If you have read that, what is that? Goff, that Justice Karju's judgment. I have a copy of that case with me. I'll just look at appointment and creation of posts is exclusive domain of the government. Courts cannot give directions for creation of a post. And that is what has been decided by Supreme Court I'll just give you the judgment of Justice Karju.
Aravali.
Aravali, yeah, correct. Yeah, Aravali Golf Club.
Wherein he says that the courts have
PM Aravali Golf Club versus Chandar Huds.
2007,
14, scale 1. Yes, correct, you're right.
Yes. But there are judgments.
You are also a service lawyer, I think.
Yes.
So we have a commonality. Good.
That's what I've seen, that invariably labor laws and service matters don't attract much participants, but they're actually quite encouraging.
No, but then I'll tell you one thing. This is an area, if a person does not read labor law, I think he can never be sensitive.
So, but once you talk of Aravali, I will take another step. There's a judgment of Gujarat Laburam Plus, which says that once you are working for around, that is Gujarat Agriculture.
See, that used to be
there is a supposition that there are vacancies opposed.
That used to be the earlier Supreme Court, when they used to give orders for regularization and prepare a scheme and then create post, and then those periods are gone. You see that in judiciary also, you have different trends coming up. Now we say these are executive, these are governmental functions, policy decisions. We cannot interfere in this. But there are judgments where courts have given direction.
After Uma Devi also there are judgments. There are judgments to the effect which says that Uma Devi said in 2006. That is 2006 volume 4 SCC
2005.
page 1. 2006 volume 4 SCC page 1. To the effect that state of Karnataka versus Uma Devi, which said that you shouldn't do, but it carved out an exception when it
but
said.
Then there are many cases where they are carved out. There was a Bombay case judgment, and there has been Justice Sikri's judgment.
Yeah. Justice T.S. Thakur's judgment, which said that.
Yeah. You can create lanes and bylanes in Uma Devi. They have created lanes and bylanes in Uma Devi.
That is the subtle difference they have created, is that the appointment should be an irregular one and not an illegal
Irregularity one. Can be cured, illegality cannot be cured. That is Uma Devi.
Uma Devi, and then, but there are judgments which said that 2006 the judgment came, and then thereafter there is an efflux of 14 years.
If
you are still continuing with someone, so therefore the judgment of the Supreme Court in Nihal Singh. Nihal Singh says that you have to.
Correct. Very good.
It said that you should visualize and regularize it.
In next webinar, both of us should be speakers.
No, you are the speaker. I'm just a moderator. I'm just learning from you. That is the. So as invariably we keep it for 1.5 hours, but it's the webinar is quite interesting, though all people, you would be surprised. I used to get a lot of messages, especially from the Delhi and Kerala, that you should call Professor BT call.
Is
So I
it?
said to the effect, and they were more focusing on the effect that you should call him for the distinctions between the culpable homicide, etc., and IPC.
Yeah,
and
I heard your lecture on that culpable homicide. I follow you to some extent. I have seen that,
as a
but
student,
I can give a different dimension to it altogether.
so we will. So that gives a cue. As they say that we have agreed principally that we will call you again. After this webinar, I will fix the date with you.
Yeah.
In fact, I had called you for this webinar on the labor law because we thought that we have done a lot of webinars on the criminal law, a lot of webinars we have done.
No problem.
Yes. So we wanted some break. We do one on motivation in a week. One we do on service matter, labor laws, etc. And rest is on criminal law and civil law. Before we part for today, I'm just apprising the participants for the tomorrow's webinar. So tomorrow, in pursuit to our webinars, kindly join us. We will be having Dr. Justice S. Vimla, a former judge of Madras High Court.
Yeah, she's in Madras High Court.
Yeah.
She is retired now.
Yes. Jurisdiction of civil court with special reference to bar of jurisdiction. Kindly do connect with us. And tomorrow, 4 p.m., as Sir will vouch upon that. And I have also heard her.
Very
and
good.
She's a very erudite speaker, and she has very good knowledge of that.
She's a good friend also.
So once you have been going to Judicial Academy, she also have what you said that birds of same feather, or birds of
fly
same
together.
Birds of same flock fly
Birds
together.
of the same feather flock together.
Yes, I stand corrected.
He used to come from Madurai to Chennai to hear me on that culpable homicide and murder distinction.
Yes, sir. So thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you very much. God bless
thank you for sharing for your insights for an engaging webinar and on a different perspective. I understand that the labor law is quite laborious, but the way you put it across was quite fascinating, and the way it was just a seamless effort on your part. And these are the things which we have to learn from you. I'm finding Mr. Ratendra Singh showing thumbs up. I'll just unmute him before we part for the day.
Thank you.
Just unmuting Mr. Ratendra Singh. In fact, I've been finding him in a lot of webinars.
Okay.
I always thought that I should ask him from where does he practice this thing.
Yeah.
No, I'm
What do you, Mr. Ratendra Singh?
Chandigarh itself, I am practicing.
Okay.
Okay. Actually, the screen is too short. Sometimes one doesn't find.
Yeah.
I will just ask his insights before we part for the day.
I think yes. Yeah, you have to unmute yourself. Is it right? Achha, okay.
So I am unmuted, and Mr. Ratendra Singh is also.
Okay.
Now I remember somebody suggesting his name also, that he comes to a lot of today.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
Yes, Mr. Ratendra Singh, for the today's webinar, what are your comments?
No, it was very fascinating, very interesting, and it kept me engaged throughout the seminar. It is very, very fine, very fine.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very detailed.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm just reminded of what Amin Sani used to do. 50 years music in a one hour session. So we had the entire capsule of the entire gamut of the labor law in 1 hour, 1.5 hours. It was quite engaging and interesting. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay blessed, and do stay connected with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.